Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this, our 61st class, as we get ever nearer to the second year or the end of the second year of our classes. We got about 5 months to go. We started in August of 2020. We got some interesting things I'm going to share with you both in the class and online. And I want to show those to you up front. So let me share my screen. And the first thing I want to show you is something many of you may have seen before. Is that visible okay, Alex, the ocean?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. This is an old version of Ocean by Chad Jones, who did a rather remarkable job with this. It's a wonderful research tool. And, but it's no longer available through him, or at least as far as I know. And so what I did was I uploaded it so that you can download it. And so I'm going to give you on this, in addition to the slides for this program, I'm going to make available to you the executable file that you can download, then execute, and you will have this. Now, he's upgraded this to another version, which is much fancier and has a lot of, let's see, the screen sharing has stopped, so let me share it again. Can you see that now?
Yep, we can.
Okay, Lights of Guidance and so on. That's just one of the books. This is his latest version of the of Ocean 2.0 reader, and he keeps upgrading. The last upgrade was in, I think, December of 2021. So it's been recently upgraded. I'll let you examine that on your own. For my research purposes, I like the other version for reasons that would take too long to go into. And but for one reason, I can use Boolean operators and so on. But the other one's more inclusive insofar as including books that aren't included in the other. Any rate, you can use either one. They're both wonderful tools for research or just finding that passage. The clue to finding anything that you need in the Baha'i writings is to remember what's called, or used to be called in computer language, a string literal, which simply means if you can find a word or preferably two words in a row from the passage you're looking for and put them in the search, then you will be able to find the passage you're looking for. It's very helpful. Well, so there are those two things, and then a third thing I'm going to share with you, that is, I'm going to give you simply, I may have given it to you before, but is the hyperlink up here to this Baha'i chronology, which I believe what Jonah Winters does this, is overseeing this. But at any rate, it's a same version as or the same information as the book that I have showed you before, which, let me see, I have it over here somewhere. Basic Baha'i Chronology. Is that backwards, or is that, it's backwards to me. Is it backwards to you, Alex?
No, it's the right way for us.
Okay, I never can figure out what I'm, at any rate, this is a wonderful book. I don't know if it's still available or not, but what this website that I'm going to provide you the link to has both the information from that and much additional information that Jonah has added in that. It's very useful. All right, so we're getting into what, for me, I've been waiting for the whole year and a half that we've been doing this, and that is the heart of the climax of the revelation of Bahá'u'lláh. Not necessarily in your minds the climax of the history of the faith. I think we're entering that, or at least we did when we formed the House of Justice in 1963. But nevertheless, we're getting at where everything starts to pull together, and you start beginning to see a shape to the revelation, that you see this is really one magnum opus that Bahá'u'lláh has given us. It's you see the logic behind the sequence in which he reveals the works that he reveals. Now, we've been kind of going back and forth a little bit insofar as we've already looked at some of the works in Adrianople and a couple of the tablets that were, if not revealed in Akká, that were, for example, the tablet to Nasir-ad-Din Shah, and we discussed that Badi delivered that. Well, that doesn't occur, obviously, until after Bahá'u'lláh is in Akká, and Badi travels by foot from Mosul to Akká and is given the honor of then going by foot to meet with the Shah and provide him with the most lengthy epistle of all the epistles that he sent to the kings and rulers. So finishing up, we're not finishing up everything that was done in Adrianople, but we're finishing up mainly two very important tablets, and we're going to mention a third, the Kitáb-i-Badi. Sort of finishing up the Adrianople period as far as we're going. Needless to say, any of these periods would hold up for you for your study great length of introspection and examination, things we haven't discussed, and so on. And I've given you the main resources for studying these. As I've said many times, the 4-volume Tahirzadeh work lists most of the major tablets in each period, even those that haven't yet been authoritatively translated. Though some have been provisionally translated, and many of those are available on the Ocean thing. You can give them what value you wish, but they don't have authoritative value. In any case, tonight then we're going to begin with two tablets, the Surah of the Branch and the Surah of the Kings. We're going to start with the Surah of the Kings, part of which we've examined before. And if you'll remember, we examined it before. Those of you who've kept up with the classes, we discussed it because the first tablet that Bahá'u'lláh revealed for the Sultan Abdulaziz has not been found, or has been lost, was destroyed, we presume. So much of this tablet was geared for him. Now, one thing you will find out as we discuss the events that ensue is that while Abdul Aziz himself was not a very nice individual, the guiding force that perpetrated his persecution of the Baha'is was his prime minister, whom we've discussed at length in the last classes. And a couple of the tablets, and much of this tablet is aimed at him as well. And so it was the prime minister who was the one who was most concerned about destroying the Baha'is, and was responsible directly for the exile of the Baha'is from Adrianople to Akká. And so our next class, 2 weeks from tonight, will be it's exciting to me when, we go on the journey with Bahá'u'lláh, and I hope you will enjoy it too, but it will take step by step the journey from, well, they traveled by foot from Adrianople to Gallipoli, and then from Gallipoli they took a ship, a steamer, and went to Alexander, to Cairo, to Jaffa, and then to Haifa, and then took a sailboat across the bay from Haifa to Akká. And so we'll follow that, what it was like when they entered the sea gate and what it was like the first few days. And then we'll follow up that with one thing after another occurs. It's a very, the words, events now start to speed up. Things are coming to a head. And of course, we're only a couple of years away from the revelation of the Kitáb-i-Aqdas, which is clearly the climax of the revelation. The book, the red book, the tablets of Bahá'u'lláh, you know, of course, the subtitle written after or revealed after the Kitáb-i-Aqdas. And a great deal of that book is reflects, such as the tajalliyat and so on, they reflect on particular laws that he selects from the Aqdas to expand on. All right, so let's begin tonight. We go back to the summons of the Lord of Hosts for our last work from that. We've gone through these others so far, but we haven't gone through the Surah Muluk, which is the tablet to the kings, or the Surah of the kings. Most of what I'm going to read you in the slides is from Shoghi Effendi. And so I'm aware that you can read it on your own as well. But the value of reading this, rather than my simply excerpting passages from that to demonstrate what the Guardian says, is that the Guardian does such a magnificent job of doing that himself. He, for example, he will, as you will see, he will first go to the Kings of Christendom, to Sultan Abdulaziz, so on. And he summarizes what parts of the work are for particular individuals or groups of individuals. The Surah Muluk, the most momentous tablet revealed by Baha'u'lláh, the Surah of Kings, in which he for the first time directs his words collectively to the entire company of the monarchs of East and West, and in which the Sultan of Turkey and his ministers, and the Sultan of Turkey is Abdulaziz, again, remember it was then still the Ottoman Empire, and his ministers, the kings of Christendom, the French and Persian ambassadors accredited to the Sublime Porte, the Muslim ecclesiastical leaders in Constantinople, its wise men, inhabitants, the people of Persia, and the philosophers of the world are separately addressed. In his message to the kings of the earth, Baha'u'lláh in the Surah Muluk discloses the character of his mission, exhorts them to embrace his message, affirms the validity of the Bab's revelation, reproves them for their indifference to his cause, enjoins them to be just and vigilant, to compose their differences and reduce their armaments. And again, of course, this is the key to the most great peace, which is well worth our discussion right now as we see one sovereign nation invading and destroying another sovereign nation, something that the pact, when it is composed and when the armaments are reduced, will take care of. And we will learn, I think, from this experience, many lessons that Baha'u'lláh spells out in detail about what has to happen insofar as the world economy is concerned, because this is an economic war as much as it is a war of domination or oppression. Expatiates on his afflictions, commends the poor to their care, warns them that divine chastisement will assail them from every direction if they refuse to heed his counsels, and prophesies his triumph upon the earth, though no king be found who would turn his face towards him. Now, this is very important. And at the end of tonight's presentation, I will show you a chronology of all of the empires that fell as prophesied by Baha'u'lláh. So that basically, when by the time of, at the end of this list, there are no more empires and kingdoms. So to the kings of Christendom, the Guardian says the kings of Christendom, more specifically, Baha'u'lláh in that same tablet censures for having failed to welcome and draw nigh unto him, who is the spirit of truth, and for having persisted in disporting themselves with their pastimes and fancies, and declares to them that they shall be called to account for their doings in the presence of him who shall gather together the entire creation. And this is referring to the ingathering, perhaps, insofar as the prophecies of both the Old New Testament and the Quran. And of course, it's referring to the afterlife as well. What's wonderful here is that this is, we're looking at the bleakest, presumably, from the point of view who are the oppressors of Baha'u'lláh and the Baha'i faith, particularly the Pasha, the prime minister to Abdulaziz. He thinks he's done it. He thinks he, in conjunction with Nasir-ad-Din Shah, has destroyed, finally, he's gotten rid of this plague upon his house and destroyed the Babis and the Baha'is, and they were being persecuted and slaughtered in both Persia and Constantinople as well. And so here we're about to go on this journey to certain death and demise of the faith with only 70 believers. So in effect, they've separated the leader with only 70 believers, and they think they've done it. And this is only, not that long ago. I mean, 1868 we're talking about. And since then, look what we've got insofar as the Baha'i faith is concerned, a worldwide religion. And something I've mentioned time and time again, but I never tire of saying it because it's so important to me individually as a Baha'i. Receiving resources from nowhere, receiving assistance from no one. And what you're going to find as we go through some of this is that once they were doomed or destined to, the fatwa was read and they were to go into exile to this prison, various countries offered to assist Baha'u'lláh, and he rejects them all. Now, this is a theme well worthy of a book or two, and that is, you can say, well, why doesn't he accept this and so on? Again, the reason simply stated, as I understand it, is that no one can say anyone assisted Baha'u'lláh or the Baha'i faith other than the Baha'is themselves. And so it grew from 70 believers isolated in a prison, as well as others scattered throughout Persia and the Ottoman Empire, in a couple elsewhere. It grew from that to a world religion with houses of worship all over the world. How did that happen? How can you give a logical explanation for what force brought that about other than an unseen force? There is no other explanation. Logically, it doesn't make sense insofar as economics is concerned and so on. In other words, what is the motive cause for this to be able to come about? So it's extremely important that he rejects these at every turn. Remember, he's rejected the help when he was in the Siyachal from the Russian ambassador. He rejected it when he was being exiled from Baghdad. He rejected it. He refused to go to pay homage to Abdulaziz when he was in Constantinople, and so on. So now he's doing it again. He bids Sultan Abdulaziz hearken to the speech of him who unerringly treadeth the straight path, exhorts him to direct in person the affairs of his people and not to repose confidence in unworthy ministers, admonishes him not to rely on his treasures, nor to overstep the bounds of moderation, but to deal with his subjects with undeviating justice, and acquaints him with the overwhelming burden of his own tribulations. In that same tablet, he asserts his innocence and his loyalty to the Sultan and his ministers, describes the circumstances of his banishment from the capital, and assures him of his prayers to God on his behalf. Notice the mixture here. On the one hand, he unhesitatingly states his station, and yet he's praying for this individual and his loyalty. And again, you think, well, why should he pledge loyalty to someone who is almost demonic in his oppression? And the reason is the same reason that we as Baha'is are have a law in which we are to abide by the law of the land in which we live. Same concept. We do not become involved in political controversy or divisiveness. Same would be, from a Muslim point of view, the Sunni, the example of the manifestation. He's showing us how you respond. You respond with respect. The ministers of the Sultan. The ministers of the Sultan, he in the Surah Muluk reprimands for their conduct and passages in which he challenges the soundness of their principles, predicts that they will be punished for their acts, denounces their pride and injustice, asserts his integrity and detachment from the vanities of the world, and proclaims his innocence. Again, to me, this is so important that Bahá'u'lláh, in other words, you cannot rationally, legitimately attribute any motive to Bahá'u'lláh for anything he does or says other than an altruistic one for the betterment of humankind. And notice how throughout everything he does and says, he rejects assistance, he rejects riches. He largely, during the last 24 years of his life in Akká, he lives in solitude as he reveals the blueprint for the world that you and I are living in. To the French ambassador, again, we're still in the Surah Muluk, the French ambassador accredited to the Sublime Porte, he in that same surah rebukes for having combined with the Persian ambassador against him, reminds him of the counsels of Jesus Christ as recorded in the Gospel of St. John, warns him that he will be held answerable for the things his hands have wrought, and counsels him, together with those like him, not to deal with anyone as he has dealt with him. To the Persian ambassador in Constantinople, to the Persian ambassador in Constantinople, he in that same tablet addresses lengthy passages in which he exposes his delusions and calumnies, denounces his injustice and the injustice of his countrymen, assures him that he harbors no ill will against him, declares that should he realize the enormity of his deed, he would mourn all the days of his life, affirms that he will persist till his death in his heedlessness, justifies his own conduct in Tehran and in Iraq, and bears witness to the corruption of the Persian minister in Baghdad and to his collusion with this minister. To the ecclesiastical leaders of Sunni Islam in Constantinople, and again, remember, Shia Islam is the less populated branch of Islam, and it is located primarily in Persia, and the rest, the Ottoman Empire and so forth, is Sunni Islam. Again, remembering, excuse me, remember that Sunni comes from the concept of example, the Sunnah, the example of the Prophet, which means the Sharia is taken not just from specific laws in the Quran, but from laws they extrapolate or infer from the actions of the Prophet. But of course, it's their own interpretation of his actions, since they've denied or rejected the guidance of the Imams. To the entire company of the ecclesiastical leaders of Sunni Islam in Constantinople, he addresses a specific message in that same Surah Muluk, in which he denounces them as heedless and spiritually dead, reproaches them for their pride and for failing to seek his presence, unveils to them the full glory and significance of his mission, affirms that their leaders, had they been alive, would have circled round him, condemns them as worshippers of names and lovers of leadership, and avows that God will find naught acceptable from them unless they be made new in his estimation. And worshippers of names, the names, of course, mean the material reality, the realm, the kingdom of names. To the wise men of Constantinople and the philosophers of the world, to the wise men of the city of Constantinople and the philosophers of the world, he devotes the concluding passages of the Surah Muluk, in which he cautions them not to wax proud before God, reveals to them the essence of his true wisdom, stresses the importance of faith and upright conduct, rebukes them for having failed to seek enlightenment from him, and counsels them not to o'erstep the bounds of God, and nor to turn their gaze towards the ways of men and their habits. There's several wonderful tablets relating to philosophy and philosophers. Of course, the one that revealed later, which is in the tablets of Bahá'u'lláh revealed after the Aqdas, of course, is the Loy Hikmat, the tablet of wisdom, which talks about the history of philosophy and philosophers. One of the principal themes of that is that all of the philosophers ultimately confess their subservience to God. They ultimately, that's what they conclude, that there is God and that they derive their wisdom from God. You may not agree with that if you take the whole of philosophy as it has become, I don't know whether you want to say degenerate or just deviated from the Western norms that we derive primarily from Greek philosophy. But the philosophers he's talking about are the greats. Certainly, as he says himself, the fathers are founders of Western philosophy. To the inhabitants of Constantinople, he in that same tablet declares that he feareth no one except God, that he speaks not except at his, God's bidding, that he follows not save God's truth, that he found the governors and elders of the city as children gathered about and disporting themselves with clay, and that he perceived no one sufficiently mature to acquire the truths which God had taught him. He bids them take firm hold on the precepts of God, warns them not to wax proud before God and his loved ones, recalls the tribulations and extols the virtues of the Imam Hussein, prays that he himself may suffer similar afflictions, prophesies that ere long God will raise up a people who will recount his troubles and demand the restitution of his rights from his oppressors, and calls upon them to give ear to his word and return unto God and repent. Again, there's any one of these sentences, any one of these passages we could talk about. They're so powerful and so replete with not just one theme, but several themes. You know, that he gives them hope if they will do what he says. He is, again, not reserved in professing that he has truth that they need to understand. You get the sense of power. You know, the pictures of, and we'll see those shortly, of Abdul Baha and Mirza Muhammad Ali and all those groups that we have were actually passport photos that they took. I forget whether it was in Gallipoli or in Adrianople before they left for Gallipoli, so they could be identified as being these exiles and people to be feared and so on. We'll get to that later, but that's important you understand that when you look, those of you who've been on pilgrimage and seen the picture of of Bahá'u'lláh, there is utter power in that look and those eyes. And yet here you see this, in addition to that, he has this, again, this sense of humor that never goes away, like children gathered and disporting themselves with clay. It's such a, well, what can I say? He's a manifestation, but it's so rich. There's so many things to find. So this was the list I was promising you. And these are, if you remember my saying the last couple of classes, that when the Surih Haykal in particular was delivered to India, that one of the first works published, which contained the letters to the 5 kings and rulers included in that, but also the Surah Muluk was widely circulated. And I will show you next week, or next class rather, how these were circulated. You know, some of you have asked that, I believe, but so how did they get to where they were meant to go? And that's very interesting. So we'll discuss that. So these are the empires that Baha'u'lláh predicted would fall. Some of them he doesn't allude to specifically, but the first of them you will see. The fall of the French monarchy, 1870. The virtual extinction of the Pope's temporal sovereignty. And what does that mean? It means, if you'll remember, that the Pope, to whom he wrote when we discussed the Surih Haykal, the papal states were a lot of land. He had a lot of power. In effect, the Pope wasn't just head of the church, he had a kingdom. And so this particular Pope we're talking about, Pope Pius, the one to whom Baha'u'lláh wrote, was overthrown, that is, his territories were, and he was limited to, they became a prisoner of the Vatican, if you remember. So he lost in 1870 with that overthrowing of his temporal power, lost the papal states. The assassination of Sultan Abdulaziz in 1876. Notice how soon this is after the prediction of Baha'u'lláh, these things occur. The assassination of Nasiruddin Shah, 4 years after the death of Baha'u'lláh. The overthrow of the Sultan. And now the reason you still have a Sultan is that even though the Ottoman Empire ultimately ends and you have a nation state, a parliamentary system of sorts, you have a president. So you still had the Ottoman Empire, sort of. It doesn't really get totally done until the First World War, but they're without much power. And so you have the overthrow of Sultan Abdulhamid II. You have the fall of the Portuguese monarchy. You have the fall of the Chinese monarchy. You have the fall of the Russian monarchy. And of course, that's very famous because of the myth of Anastasia, but the whole, we sort of fall in love in a romantic sense with the story of the Tsar Nicholas and his family and how they were had this wonderful life. And there's all these films of them you can see on YouTube if you pull them up, and how they were taken away and slaughtered by the Bolshevik Revolution. The fall of the German monarchy, so no more Kaiser Wilhelm. You have the First World War, where Germany is overthrown. The fall of the Austrian monarchy. The fall of the Hungarian monarchy. That's 1918, still First World War. Fall of the Turkish monarchy in 1922. the collapse of the Caliphate in 1924. Now, the Caliphate, again, this is identical with the Ottoman Empire and so on. So there is no more Caliphate. So who, in effect, is head of Islam? And the answer is no one. And that's why you have this decline in the Middle East of all these Islamic states, and you have these straight lines in the sand that form these nations that emerged after the First World War, such as Jordan, Syria, and so on. And so you have Lebanon and so on. So you have these artificial things, but the whole idea of Islam as this great power, the head of which is the Caliphate, it's gone, it's evaporated. That's why, it's only been since we had the wars in Baghdad and so on, and the Twin Towers and so on, that anybody knew anything about Islam or anything about the Middle East, really. The fall of the Qajar dynasty, and the Qajar, of course, is the family line of Nasiruddin Shah. The fall of the Spanish monarchy, and of course, this was the fascist falangistas and Franco. You have a dictatorship. The fall of the Albanian monarchy, the Siberian monarchy, the Italian monarchy, the Bulgarian monarchy, the Romanian monarchy. So that's, you can say, well, are all those directly attributable to Baha'u'llah's prophecy? No, Baha'u'lláh, in the one hand, is prophesying. On the other hand, he's stating the logical consequence of using an antiquated system of governance in a world that no longer can be governed by antiquated systems, where you need, in effect, the representational forms of government. Well, we'll discuss that at length in our Q&A if you want. But that's and we'll discuss it, of course, a lot more when we get to the Aqdas and Baha'u'llah's blueprint for a world civilization, and why, when he says the world is one country, he doesn't say the world's going to become one country. He says the world is one country and mankind, its citizens. In other words, it's already occurred. Now you need to have a wineskin to contain this new wine, if you're talking about the revelation, but also you need a new administrative structure to accommodate a new social reality, which is the planet has become one interdependent collective entity. And so you need a collective commonwealth to accommodate the needs of that interdependency. So we end up with the tablet of the branch, which is not a very long tablet. It has been translated, and it was in the old volume, which is still available, called the Baha'i World Faith, but most of the works in that have been put into more authoritative collections, so that the tablets of Baha'u'lláh, the hidden words are in it, and of course that's in a separate volume, and so on, and the tablets revealed after the Aqdas are in this volume. And then it has two sections, one on Baha'u'lláh and one on Abdul-Baha, and the section on Abdul-Baha contains the works that have been included in selections from the writings of Abdul-Baha. Some of them have not been, because if they couldn't find the original from which that translation had been made, then they didn't include it. Same thing true, those of you who are older Baha'is may be aware that there was originally a 3-volume collection of the writings of Abdul-Baha, huge collection. And so gradually, again, the authoritative translation of those works occurred as they found the originals for those. So we come to the Tablet of the Branch, which is on pages 204 through 207 of this work. It's only 3 pages long. And so you have the Ghusn-i Azam, the most great branch, the Ghusni Akbar, the greater branch. These are titles that Baha'u'lláh conferred upon his sons, Abdul Baha and Mírzá Muhammad Ali, respectively. An interesting question arose in my wife's class on book 8, where one of the participants said, why in the tablet of the branch in the tablet of the branch and in the Kitáb-i-Aqdas, the book of my covenant, why doesn't he simply say Abdul Baha instead of saying these titles? Well, it's a good question. In other words, well, there wouldn't be any confusion then, would it? Who's the greatest branch? Who's the greater branch? Well, there are two things. You have in the Baha'i faith a degree of utilization of what's called primogeniture, which is the firstborn son has certain duties and obligations. And so in one sense, this is referring to who is first and who is second, and so far as order of birth. But these titles have a more important, and that is, of course, if you are a student of grammar, you know that you have, and with an adjective, you have the degree of the great, and then the greater and greatest, the comparative degrees of an adjective. And so you would say, well, greater sounds greater than greatest, but no, of course not. The sequence is great, greater, greatest, or most great. This becomes important later. But another reason he doesn't call Abdul Baha in these tablets is because he didn't have that name, Abdul Baha. Abdul Baha had the following titles. The first one, of course, his given name, Abbas Effendi. The second was, of course, Akká, the master. He was called the master when he was a child. He was called the master by Baha'u'lláh throughout his life, and everyone addressed him as such. So he had this title of dignity from the get-go. The mystery of God, and we can go into that later as we get into the ministry of Abdul Baha, because it's a very important term and it has a very specific relevance to his station, unique in the annals of revealed religions. The most great branch, the exemplar. And of course, we recently had that movie last year on celebrating the centenary of the death of Abdul Baha, called The Exemplar. Wonderful work. The limb of the law of God. Now, these are quotes from the Kitáb-i-Aqdas. The most great favor unto men, the most perfect bounty. And then, of course, the name that he devised for himself, Abdul Baha. And there's that beautiful tablet he wrote that we'll look at later, where he says that this is not only his title, but his identity, his one goal in life, and so on. He has a series of statements about why this is everything he is a servant of Baha'u'lláh. That's his whole reason for being. This is a picture taken, even though it looks beautiful when you isolate it like that, it was taken as a passport photo, though passport implies that you can go somewhere. So really as an identity or identifier of these exiles. So that's why they're not happy. That's why they're not smiling. They've got nothing to smile about. They're about to be exiled, presumably to their death. This is Mirza Muhammad Ali, the one who would be the vicious enemy opposing Abdul Baha. Incredible things that he did. And at the same time, Abdul Baha is 24. His younger brother, Mirza Muhammad Ali, is 16. Mirza Mehdi, I didn't put in this picture because we're dealing with the titles here and the contrast between the greater branch and the most great branch. So Ghusni Akbar is the greater branch, but the titles that Baha'u'lláh gave him were the center of sedition, the prime mover of mischief. So quite a difference. The Surah Gusnik, the tablet of the branch, revealed from Mirza Ali Rida, we remember him from about 4 classes ago, a prominent Baha'i of Khorasan, envisaged the station of Gusni al-Azam, the most great, the mighty branch, the eldest son of Bahá'u'lláh, who in future years, known by the name of Abdul Baha, was to be the center of Bahá'u'llah's peerless covenant. And that's a quote from Balyuzi, King of Glory. Excuse me. To him, whilst in Adrianople, that same father had in the Surih Gusni, the tablet of the branch, referred as this sacred and glorious being, this branch of holiness, as this limb of the law of God, as his most great favor unto men, as his most perfect bounty conferred upon them, as one through whom every moldering bone is quickened, declaring that whoso turneth towards him hath turned towards God, and that they who deprive themselves of the shadow of the branch are lost in the wilderness of error. And that's a quote from The Guardian, and God Passes By, though the quotes within it are, of course, from the tablet itself. The main theme of the Surah Gusni is the unveiling of the station of Abdul Baha. In it, Abdul Baha is referred to as the trust of God, this sacred and glorious being, this branch of holiness, this limb of the law of God, this sublime, this blessed, this mighty, this exalted handiwork. And that's another way of looking at the mystery of God. The most great favor, the most perfect bounty. In his own written statements, whether in the Kitáb-i-Aqdas, the most weighty and sacred of all the works of Baha'u'lláh, or in the Kitáb-i-Aqdas, the book of his covenant, or in the Surah Gusni, the tablet of the branch, such references as have been recorded by the pen of Baha'u'lláh, references which the tablets of his father addressed to him mightily reinforce, invest Abdul Baha with the power, surround him with a halo which the present generation can never adequately appreciate. Now, as you read that, I encourage you to go to another site that I have given you in the past. I'll put that on the slides for this session too. Is available online, both as a YouTube audio file and also as a written file, is the incredible talk shortly after the death of the Guardian about the Guardian by hand of the cause of God, Leroy Ois. And one of the things that is striking among all the other things that are so wonderful in that talk is the Guardian's incredible love in, I don't know what adjective to use, but his love for Abdul Baha in the sense that in no way did he consider himself some sort of replacement or successor in that sense. I mean, effectively he had this weighty burden on his shoulders. But the fact is I'll see if I can put a clip of that for next time, where he talks about where he tells Leroy Ois, Leroy, don't ever talk about the ministry of the Guardian. No. These are the days after the ministry of Abdul Baha. In other words, he didn't want he was a very humble person, obviously. How many pictures of the Guardian are there? Just their handful. He didn't want his picture taken. He didn't want to, well, we'll get to that when we get to the Guardian. That should probably be about this time next year. Haji Mirza Haidar Ali. This is, we'll finish with this, and this is wonderful. Now, there's a younger picture of him of this, but I love this picture. He is, of course, called the Delight of the Hearts, the Angel of Carmel. And there's a wonderful book by hand of the cause of God, Abul Qasim Faizi, called The Delight of the Hearts. And the story of this man in that biography is beyond belief. He has humor, but he is the most just totally fearless person I think I've ever read about, or among them, certainly. He was in prison after prison after prison. But this is not what we're talking about right now. We'll talk about that later. When Haji Mirza Haidar Ali, and that was in Cairo where he was supposed to teach the faith, was freed from prison and returned to Akká, he once again attained the presence of Bahá'u'lláh. He then traveled to and from Iran at Bahá'u'llah's request, continuing to teach the cause with utmost fervor. But the story we're going to end our class on tonight, the last part of this quote here, during the final years of his life, Abdul Baha invited him to the Holy Land where he continued to serve. It was here that he, that is Haji Mirza Haidar Ali, penned his memoirs, a suggestion given him by the master himself after he learned of Haidar Ali's eye trouble. In other words, he wouldn't be able to do it. And so a lot of the book by Faizi are quotes from the journals that he penned. In fact, most of it. The letter from Abdul Baha to Haidar Ali. This is beautiful, but this isn't what I want to end with. And I realize we're going over time, but it doesn't bother me. I hope it doesn't bother you. O thou who art partner and co-sharer with Abdul Baha in servitude to the threshold of Baha. It is evening and these wandering birds are nestled in the home of the maidservant of God, Mrs. Helen Goodall in Oakland, California. Now, this is when Abdul Baha is in California on his journey in the United States. It is the 19-day feast. A number of the faithful friends and pure and illumined leaves of God are supplicating the all-glorious kingdom. All the delicacies are spread and ready, and the table is exquisitely arranged. Oh, how thou art missed. Severed from all else, they sing a new song, and with a new voice repeat spiritual notes. They are in a state of absolute love and supplication. Oh, how thou art missed. Oh, how thou art missed. So you get just a glimpse here of the love that Abdul Baha had for this individual. And the final anecdote is this. Abdul Baha intimated to Haji Mirza Haidar Ali that when he visited the mansion to say farewell, he would be invited by Mirza Muhammad Ali to meet with him in private. Abdul Baha advised the Haji that should he receive such an invitation, he should accept, and with great humility say whatever his heart and conscience dictated to him. This is how the Haji records the story of the interview. And again, this is with Mirza Muhammad Ali, who at that time was occupying the mansion. I think this is after the death of Baha'u'lláh. It was late at night that Mirza Muhammad Ali summoned me to his room. He asked his son Shu'lao, who was present, to leave because he wanted to talk to me confidentially. After much conversation, he said, I wish to ask you a question in confidence. Don't you think that I could have also inherited what my brother Abdul Baha has inherited from the Blessed Beauty? I said to him, in all references to Abdul Baha, the Blessed Beauty has assigned to him all the exalted names and praiseworthy attributes. He enjoined on us all to show forth for the exaltation of his cause, the utmost love and humility towards his person. In the Kitáb-i-Aqdas, so this would be after his death, because that was revealed shortly before his death, he has clearly stated, it is incumbent upon the Agsan, the Afnan, my kindred, to turn one and all their faces towards this most mighty branch. Therefore, to the extent that you show forth humility, self-effacement, and utter nothingness to his blessed person, Abdul Baha, you will accordingly acquire the exalted qualities you wish to have. Based on the same principle, you will lose these qualities to the extent you lessen the measure of your humility and submissiveness towards him. The reason for this is that all the praise and honor which are bestowed upon you by Baha'u'lláh are dependent upon certain conditions, certain verses of the Kitáb-i-Aqdas and their further elucidation in the Kitáb-i-Aqdas are as unequivocal and clear as the sun at midday. God forbid, if for one moment in your heart you might think the passage in the Kitáb-i-Aqdas ought to have directed the Agsan, the Afnan, and others to turn their faces towards the Ghusn al-Akbar. It is clear you do not possess what the Master possesses. God, exalted be he, does not act hypocritically, nor does he create means of division among the people. It is impossible for the one true God to entrust the guardianship of his cause to two individuals at the same time. Apart from all this, who is it in the world of being that can claim to rival the Master on any level? I was talking on these lines when he arose from his seat saying, it was time to go to bed. So I left him. Isn't that wonderful? Well, I was going to say a few things about the Kitáb-i-Badi, but I'll save that for next time. It's an important work because it's the apologia for the Baha'i faith in the same way that the Aqdas is the apologia for the Babi faith. But we'll mention that next time. So we come to the Qibla once again and the end of class 61.